system. And so, if you remember last two classes, we started talking about language teaching methods, methodology, pedagogy of language teaching. And in this case, mainly the second language we're talking about, it's mainly English, so ELT, English language teaching. And I have already told you to read chapter 4 from Guy Cook, and there, some methods are already discussed. So the method like grammar translation method, then direct method, and then continued kind of resurgence of direct method with natural methods, the kind of combinations we have looked at. If you have read the chapter, and if you did not, read the chapter, that's what you will go blank. Someone said that she goes blank, so you will go blank, basically, what I say. So, and then you have communicative approaches or communicative methods of language teaching. So this method, what I'm talking about today, the audiolingual method. So audiolingual method is not discussed in chapter 4. So that's what, and this is really important. You need to know this method, especially if you're talking about second language teaching. So today, so my target is that, so I'll be talking about audiolingual method of, so to say, second language teaching and English language teaching here. Okay. So before that, so why audiolingual method came into picture? What is the background of audiolingual method? Why, we had already a grammar translation method, and then direct method are also introduced. So that means there are some kind of drawbacks must be there with those direct methods or grammar translation method, and as a result, there is another method came into picture. As simple as that, you see. So the audiolingual method, there is a background, whole background, socio-historical context. If you look at why this method came into picture, and also I was telling you even direct method why it came into picture. Earlier, the need for language learning was different, and the need for language learning was also, even if you look at it, was changing. Changing. If you look at the geopolitics, the global scenario, the kind of trade and business, and US being the epicenter of all this, whether it's the financial power, the kind of power relation, hegemonic relation we're talking about. So somehow that was the epicenter, and there are some of the things which is being practiced, and so rest of the places in the world, it's also people also start follow some of these things, you see. So whether it is direct method, audiolingual method, and some other things, especially in pedagogy. So we'll talk about that today in this class. So why audiolingual method, and what are the key characteristics of audiolingual method? So with key characteristics and the methodics of teaching, especially whether it's a teacher-centric or student-centric, and other characteristics, and what are the limitations also the audiolingual methods have, and then we'll have our discussion, and also try to compare audiolingual method with direct method. Okay, so this is my tentative kind of plan today. So I am hopeful that within 1.5 hours I would be able to kind of whatever the plan I have, I'd be able to complete, that lecture today. Now, now the kind of limitations of the direct method. So I won't be asking this question to you because already we discussed the kind of limitations in the last class. So you know what are the limitations of the direct method. Okay. So briefly, one of you just could you simply tell me 2 or 3 limitations of the direct method. Please, I cannot see whoever is raising the hand and all. Please just unmute yourself and say, introduce yourself and just say.
Sir, this is Shivam Kumar.
Shivam. Yes, Shivam, please just briefly,
yes, sir.
Quickly.
Sir, first one is it is not applicable to large classes. Second one is it extravagantly excel in keeping the mother tongue of learners away from them. Third one is due to lack of native teachers in those areas, or they are expensive. The emphasis on native like competence or performance is uh, a nonsense kind of thing. And fourth one is it depends very much upon the teacher's personality, as you have discussed in the last class, and his methods. So sometimes it's become tormenting for the students. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Shivam. If the teacher is bad, that means the whole teaching methodology will be affected, and maybe even the learners may not learn anything. You see, so totally depends on teachers, and his whatever the roles, visionary plan, and all lesson plan and everything. You see, so that's what. Thank you, Shivam. Within, let's say briefly, you just talked about the limitations. So and somewhere at the that's what Shivam also mentioned. We also discussed that the kind of similarities between naturalistic first language acquisition and classroom foreign language learning. So there is always a kind of distortion if you look at. So the kind of first language acquisition and the way you are saying that it should be acquired like the first language. So it is not happening basically if you look at it. There is a distortion going on, and that's the point. It was largely dependent on the teaching skills of teachers, and so no focus was on textbooks. And so it required teachers who were native speakers or who had native like fluency in the foreign language. And we already discussed that to have teachers, especially the native teachers in different countries, especially if you're talking about English language for that matter, so you have dearth of native teachers, and not all teachers were proficient enough in this methodology. So the kind of methodology we are talking about, teachers that themselves are not proficient enough in this methodology. So it was pointed out that strict dependence on the principles of direct method was counterproductive. On the other hand, we had seen that it is mainly counterproductive, and so that's what Harvard psychologist Roger Brown. So he says that what is happening because you're focusing on mainly the spoken part. So a teacher performing verbal gymnastic in an attempt to convey the meaning of Japanese words when translation would have been a much more efficient technique. So, in some cases, you see, so you are performing kind of verbal gymnastics because you are not allowed to speak in the mother tongue. And if you remember, I was telling you the Berlitz schools, their main motto, even they are monitoring the teachers. So even the teachers, they are speaking in the mother tongue, uh, maybe translating in the mother tongue some of the words. So maybe the teacher is fired. Can you believe that kind of approach? You see, so somehow, so Roger Brown says that teacher is performing verbal gymnastics, and so translation is better to some extent if you can also explain some concepts easily by translating. So please go ahead. So this is where Roger Brown saying that mostly teacher is performing verbal gymnastics, and learners or the students, they do not understand. And it also made great demands on the imagination of the teachers. And if the teacher, he himself, is not visionary, is not imaginative, not doing his lesson plan, so what is going to happen to the students? You can understand that. So we have, let's say, good teachers, bad teachers, same way. Same good students, bad students, the same way. See, you can grade also teachers as well. So if the teacher is bad, so the whole thing will be affected. You see. So and so the direct method often gave learners a false impression of acquiring native-like proficiency in speech. It's a kind of false impression, and we understand that because, especially in the second language setting, the kind of science we talked about, especially the maturation of our vocal tract we are talking about, it takes place, especially. So the kind of native-like proficiency, so it gives a false impression. Exactly. So whoever the Americans, if they come to India to learn, Hindi or any Indian languages for that matter, they cannot speak Hindi or Tamil, Telugu, Bangla the way we speak. The same way. So it's other way around. Even if you talk about, so for us also, um, We are not parrots basically. We are not parrots or some kind of mimicry things people do. So language is not, cannot be seen that kind of behavior, because maybe parrot can imitate better than humans for that matter, you see. So it gives kind of false impression of acquiring native like proficiency in speech, you see. And class size, I already told you that since it's a method which is totally student centric or the learner centric, and depending on the class size, if you look at, and if let's say there are 30 students in the class and you have only 2 hours and lots of questions and answers between teacher and student, and can you imagine how much time you need, especially in this class system, 2 hours class. Even if I start talking to 1 or 2 students and half an hour or more than half an hour, so rest of the students and simply will see and, oh, okay, he is giving too much importance to 1 or 2. The same way, you see. So depending on the class size, so it kind of demands, the demand is a smaller class size. But in practically, if you look at the class size, mostly the class size is bigger, and 30, 40, 50, or at times more than 50 also, depends on, you see. So the class size, there is a little attempt to treat language content systematically. When you look at, if you look at the language content, so there is no systematic way the teacher is attempting, especially if you're talking about the language content, because and the lesson plan and everything, the grammatical, whatever the assignments we are talking about, teacher is making his own assignment, the kind of plan, because there is no textbook. So little attempt to treat language content systematically. You see, neither was there is a consensus on grammar, sentence pattern, and vocabulary for beginning, intermediate, and advanced learners. So another drawback is that so you do not make kind of distinction between, let's say, the beginner, intermediate, or the advanced learners. So whoever is coming, whichever the level, all of them are clubbed together, in the same class, So this is also one of the drawbacks of this method. And another one is there is no standardization of the vocabulary or grammar that was included. And even we do not know, talking about the standardization of the vocabulary or the grammar for that matter, and we know that which grammar we are talking about. Grammar means I'm talking about, let's say, the variety. Even since you are not following the prescriptive grammar, so are you following the descriptive grammar, or whichever the regional variety for that matter? Let's say the teacher, he himself speaks a particular regional variety or the social variety for that matter. So he will be giving instructions following that particular variety. So there is no standardization of the vocabulary, neither the vocabulary part or the grammar part. Okay, so these are some of the limitations. I think mostly some of the limitations we discussed in the last class, and then I thought of, since I'm making a PowerPoint presentation, and just I'll note down those things and I'll show it to you. I think this is clear to you. Okay, and now what happened? You see, if you look, I was telling you in the last class that somehow the direct method is also known by natural approach or natural method. Many people they call it, but it's not exactly. Because somehow you can say that direct method was later on upgraded to natural approach to some extent, because whichever the drawbacks or the shortcomings of direct method were there, so the principles of linguistics, mainly linguistic theories and all, were taken into account, and somehow then people started calling this direct method as kind of natural approach, natural language learning. Okay. So what we see, especially if you try to look at the grammar translation method, the focus was totally different. If you're talking about grammar translation method, so direct method basically or definitely it was a kind of revolution, but not a complete one. So what happened? Direct method, though it challenged, so to say, the grammar translation method, but it brought many characteristics of grammar translation method, as if like explanation and grading of grammar rules. So though they were in principle, they are not saying that we are not explaining. Remember, it's basically action, not explanation. It's action. but inherently they are explaining and even grading the students on the basis of the grammar rules. Inherently, I'm saying is, and even they are explaining the grammatical rules in, so to say, in the target language. So you to some extent you criticize the whole grammar translation method, but most of the teachers mostly doing the same thing in especially in direct method of language teaching. And language was divided into two things here. One is the vocabulary part, as you remember, vocabulary, and the pronunciation practices. And the emphasis was more given to the pronunciation practices. Okay. So, and teachers had to do many things and without explanation and translation and empty. So lots of burden to teachers, as I already told you, and so teachers, they have to do many things, and so lots of burden. And grammar rules, new words have to be worked out by the students from the context, and also students also, since it's a totally a new language, so how do they kind of work out the grammatical rules if the teacher is not explaining, and they are also explaining in the target language, that the students or the learners, they do not know the target language. So again, it's a problematic. So somewhere, yeah. So what we had seen that, let's say, especially talking about the vocabulary thing. Especially in semantics, there are two kinds of tradition. You must have done this semantics, or especially in introduction to linguistics course. So there is a referential theory, and another is a mentalist tradition and the mentalist theory. So there are certain words which you have referenced in the real world. So let's say the word butterfly. So butterfly can be easily translated. It's very easy, but especially in languages or language, you have many notions, very abstract notions, and so somewhere it belongs to maybe somewhere in the mind also. So it's very difficult at times to translate those abstract notions, not only that, some, let's say, even talking about oxygen, or maybe carbon dioxide, and there are many other things. You see, how do you translate exactly in other languages? You see, so there are many things. So the teacher, they had lots of problems, especially if you're talking about the mentalist traditions, and just I'm mentioning 2 or 3 words. Let's say denationalization, demonetization. So how do you explain those this concept in the target language? It's not easy, and so that's what the kind of problems we had seen. So what happened? The kind of problem what direct method was facing. So there are new ideas were incorporated in the direct method, and later on that direct method were known by, let's say, natural approach, and it were bypassed by radical new ideas. And that's what I was telling you from the very beginning, that from the inputs of linguistics and first language acquisition or second language acquisition research. So the direct method brought many new ideas, mainly from linguistic research, first language and second language research, you see. So one of the understanding is that, somehow what happens, the children, if you're talking about the first language acquisition, the children, they acquire the language subconsciously. So they are saying that somehow, even for second language acquisition, even that kind of environment has to be given. Okay, and even earlier, what happened in direct method, if student or learners is committing mistakes, making mistakes, the teacher is kind of telling him immediately, no, this is the mistake, don't commit the mistake, and so they're saying that yes, mistakes is fine, you see. And because children also, if you compare the grammar of children as well as compare children's grammar with adults grammar, children, they also make mistakes. So mistakes is fine and accepted, and not over correction, not too much over correction. So there are many things, especially related to first language acquisition, and second language research, the kind of ideas were brought there, and those are practiced also, you see. So an adult learner can repeat the road to proficiency of the native speaking child. So this is where, and another thing, mainly, and the learning would take place how? Without explanation or grading and without correction of errors. You see that? Without correction of errors, because especially in the first language acquisition, the especially elders, they do not correct. So without correction of errors, and this is where the meaningful output input. You remember the meaningful input, the kind of theory we are talking about, Stephen Krashen's theory, comprehensible input. If you remember, I talked about Stephen Krashen's hypothesis, 5 hypotheses. To remember, so this is where the natural approach is coming into picture after 1970s, somewhere around 1970s or 80s. This is the time. But the existence of direct method were before that, you see. So the ideas which were taken into account, so even from Stephen Krashen's theory, so this one is that learners should be introduced to meaningful input. So comprehensible input, if you remember. So this is also, and also remember that natural order hypothesis. So learners would follow an internally determined natural order of their own, whatever their mother language is, whichever the mother language, so they will have their natural order. So I already discussed that natural order hypothesis when I was talking about Stephen Krashen's. Okay, so these are some of the things. Just briefly, I'm saying that these are taken from first language research and the second language research, and the practitioners who were teaching second language, in this case English for that matter. So they gained a lot, from this and another thing, just I'll tell you. So what happened earlier, at the time of the direct method, so language practitioners who were teaching language, second language and all, and those language practitioners are not called applied linguists for that matter, So they are kind of language practitioners. But later on, so the term like applied linguist, came into existence after 1948 and after 1950s and all, you see. And so this is another information. Now, so direct method focused on alone in teaching speech and the use of the target language, as you know that, and it is also known as the natural method of language teaching. So, though it is also known as natural method, and you know the distinction now why it is known as the natural method of language teaching, because later on some of the principles of first language and second language acquisition were taken into account in direct method, and that's the reason it is called natural method, you see. And this was based on some of the principles of mother tongue acquisition, especially talking about the first language acquisition. And so towards the end of the 19th century, and somewhere I'm talking about direct method here, so Xavier Frank proposed that language teaching should be done in the target language. You remember? So they are basically criticizing grammar translation method, and something should come. And I'm trying to give you a kind of background how this direct method came into picture and natural method came into picture, and somehow even talking about the kind of his background of audiolingual method, you see. And this is Professor Henry Sweet, and this is the time, if you look at, he had already established the science of phonetics. The science of phonetics, especially in the American tradition, we did not see, and this is the time the science of phonetics were already established, and it was become increasingly possible to write languages as they were spoken. Earlier, it was not possible, but later on, when the science of phonetics, especially the IPA symbols and all, you see, and it's a beautiful movie, My Fair Lady. If you just see, watch the movie. So there is a Professor Henry Higgin, at the same. There is a character Eliza Doolittle. It's a really interesting movie. Please, in your spare time, please do see that movie. My Fair Lady, based on George Bernard Shaw's play Pygmalion. Really good. So what happened? though direct method incorporated some of the principles of first language acquisition and second language research, and even after that, direct method also faced lots of problems. There are lots of drawbacks also, especially in the natural approach we are talking about. So what is this? Try to understand this, and this is something, the kind of principles. So it was developed in the USA in the 1970s and 1980s, and the kind of second language research and inputs I already told you. And so the same kind of ideas were, let's say, exported globally, as if like it's a globally relevant without regard to differing educational traditions and language learning context. And try to understand that whichever the principles you have developed in USA, and if you think that it's a kind of cure all medicine, can be applied whichever the country, whichever the context. So as a result, and it's actually it failed mainly. So it paid no heed to variation in class size. Again, it's a problem with the direct method, and here also the natural approach, or to concepts of teacher role. Even the concepts of teacher role, and and later on there are lots of research are conducted, and this is one of the principle we had seen, that instruction versus no instruction. And so let's say one set of group were instructed, given instruction, and another set of group were not given instruction. So which group, let's say, which group learned the language better? So we had seen that the instruction does affect language learning, especially if you're talking about the second language learning. Maybe in the first case, first language acquisition, maybe it's not even overt correction, kind of correction, reinforcement, and corrections may not helping the child, But here, especially in the second language learning cases, so instruction does affect language learning, and it has been proved later on, And so this is where some of the drawbacks we had also seen in the natural approach as well, and also other drawbacks what direct method already had. You see, the talk about the teacher and the kind of teacher, native teachers we were talking about earlier. Same thing, also problem here, the native teachers also. Okay, so this is the time, so some people, so what, this is a kind of mixed kind of things are going on, you see. So people were teaching second language with grammar translation method, with direct method. Then some people say that, okay, it's not only that, we need to incorporate reading method as well, you see. So reading method also came into picture. That was the time, somewhere in many cases what happened, some people, they simply can speak some sentences, but they are not able to read and write. So people emphasized on reading method, So, and this is where I'm just simply telling you, this is, so in spite of years of training in a given language, children were not acquiring the reading and writing skills in the target languages. So whichever the target language we're talking about, so not happening. So Coleman report 1929, called the Modern Foreign Language Study, suggested that one could not waste 2 years of foreign language learning for just acquiring some spoken skills, and that learners must be able to read the target language with some understanding. So they have to read as well. So this is Coleman report 1929. So, and Michael West, he focused on enhancing reading skills through vocabulary management. So Michael West in UK, and on the basis of words occurring frequently in day-to-day context, he created the famous General Service List of English words in 1953. So all these frequently used words, let's say, so somehow there are 2000 frequently words he categorized, and especially the learners were, let's say, given those words, and introduced those words in a particular context also. So this was the list about 2000 frequently occurring words in English, and it formed the basis of reading-oriented language teaching. This is the time I'm talking about. So grammar translation method, direct method, even reading method were introduced. And reading method or reading approach, if you look at it, so what happens, and reading is really good, and I told you, even Stephen Krashen, he himself somehow will talk about reading approach, a reading method of language learning, because reading is good, and learners, they improve their knowledge and get something new. So reading is an active skill, and it involves inferencing, guessing, predicting. By reading, students will know about the tenses, kinds of tenses, and how to use it. They also will know about the different of culture by reading cross-cultural understanding, and they will learn how to pronounce the words correctly. See, this is where a reading approach definitely helps, you see. And teachers should teach and emphasize the students to read effectively by using reading approach. So they are focusing that, yes, along with whatever the approach you are taking into account, whether it's grammar translation method or let's say direct method or natural approach. So reading approach has to be also taken into account, and there are different kinds of readings are being practiced, let's say in the class by the teachers. So extensive reading, intensive reading, reading aloud, shared reading, group of people, they're sharing the reading, guided reading. So teacher is present and guiding how to read, and independent reading. So there are different types of reading are there, you see. And so students and students and teacher in the class and all, and still this is being practiced, especially in the schools, even if you look at schools and colleges also. And it's pretty useful also. It's pretty useful for learning second language, which is the second language we are talking about. Okay. So, and now if you look at the kind of trend I'm trying to give you here, so until the World War II, and made very specific demands for being proficient in spoken skills and in limited domain of warfare and spying, and try to understand that this is the time we're talking about, somewhere between the First World War and the Second World War, and maybe even post Second World War. And so, and this is the time, so, and somehow this time, so three methods that help were the grammar translation method, the direct method, and the reading method. This was the time, and now, and so after that, let's say, somehow, and this is the time people felt that these three methods are not enough. Whether you talk about grammar translation method, whether you talk about direct method, or the natural approach you are talking about. Natural approach came later on, after 1970s, I told you. So it's not sufficient enough. So we need something else. Okay. So reading method. So the audiolingual method, let's say, later on came into picture. So the question is that, the simple question, so why different types of approach or methods keep surfacing from time to time? The simple answer is that you have a different kind of need of the learners, and the socio-cultural context is also different. You see, 1920s, after 1940s, the need is totally different. Today's need, let's say if we talk about today's need of learning second language, it is different, So that's what different types of methods and approach keep surfacing from time to time. And so American schools and colleges practiced a modified version of the direct method. So in America, we had seen that in different schools and colleges, they practiced direct methods. Though it has its limitations, they are practicing. And it needed because there is a requirement of quick learning with oral proficiency was needed during the World War II. And try to understand that during World War II, we need a kind of oral proficiency, not only writing, but oral proficiency was needed during the World War II. So why is that? You know that because many people were sent to different countries as a spy, so that they know whatever the strategy of their enemies, for that matter. You see, so let's say you are going to whichever the country, for that matter. So you need to learn that language, not only language, the culture at the same time. You see, so. And you have to speak the language of that particular nations, you see. So many people are sent as spy. So if you do not know the language, so in first attempt, let's say you will be caught. So that was the time, you see. So requirement of quick learning with oral proficiency was needed during the World War II. I try to understand the socio-historical context I am talking about. And also, entry of the United States into the World War II had a significant effect on language learning in America, and especially the kind of context I'm talking about, the audiolingual methods. And now what happened? So to supply the US government with personnel who were fluent in German, French, Italian, Chinese, Japanese, Malay, and other languages, and who could work as interpreters, courtroom assistants, and translators. So this is where the whole business started, you see. And it was necessary to set up a special language training program. And a special language training program, Bloomfield, he himself, I told you that somewhere around 1940s, Bloomfield, he himself, and set up this Army Specialized Training Program was established in 1942. And for that matter, just simply telling you, Chomsky, the project he was working on, it's also funded by US Army. The syntactic structures and other projects he were initially working on, it was also funded by US Army initially, and so the whole thing, the Army Specialized Training Program was established in 1942 with government support, you see. And what kind of training program? We're talking about the language training program here, you see. And this is the time 55 American universities were involved in the program by the beginning of the 1943. 55 American universities. Can you imagine? And the main purpose was to teach, it's not only English, other languages at the same time. You see, the second language you're talking about, it could be German, it could be French, Italian, Chinese, Japanese, because this is the time somewhere the World War was also going on. And not only that, even the post-World War, it also continued, you see. And so that's what I was telling you, that objectives, what was there, somehow talking about 1942 or during this World War I or World War II. Now maybe people may have different kind of objectives, especially for language learning. And so this is where objectives of special language training program, I was talking about Bloomfield. So students or learners to attain conversational proficiency in a variety of foreign languages. So they have to conversational proficiency in a variety of foreign languages. And Leonard Bloomfield at Yale University developed training programs as part of the linguistic research that were designed to give linguists and anthropologists mastery of American Indian languages. And it's not only to some extent English, other American Indian languages. There are many American Indian languages, Inuktitut, Sarsi. There are many. Just you can Google, you can find it. And as a result, textbooks did not exist for such languages as well. If you talk about this, and interestingly, I talk about this whole tradition, especially American tradition, the fieldwork traditions, and even the Bloomfield tradition, Sapir and Boas traditions we talk about, and the whole fieldwork traditions in America started from there, somewhere around 1930s and all, and even a Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, if you're talking about Sapir and Whorf, who are these people? Whether language influences our thought or other way around, you see, and or the culture influences our thought other way around. So these are the interesting ideas coming from the people who are involved working on different languages. It's not only English, many American Indian languages, and so I can just tell you many names who are involved in this traditions, who are working on different languages, you see. And so whether it is Sapir, whether it is Franz Boas, whether it is Leonard Whorf, and there are many other people, in the traditions and all, So really interesting. So the kind of socio-historical context of methods. So what kind of method will be used at a given point of time depends on the historical situation goals and motivations of the community, and the educational philosophy and the pedagogical theory available at that point of time. Try to understand this. You see, it's not that some methods are coming out of the blue in a vacuum. No, it depends on the historical situation, goals and motivation of the community, and the educational philosophy, the kind of educational philosophy the nation takes into account, and the pedagogical theory which are available at that point of time. You see, so so the primary motive for learning a foreign language was to acquire spoken fluency so as not to betray one's original identity. A native speaker of English could pass off as German or vice versa. So you are learning, let's say, German and passing off as a kind of German, So this is where betray one's original identity. So if you are English, you can pass off as a German as well, or vice versa. And not only German, other languages. I was also talking about Italian, Chinese, Russian. There are many other languages we are talking about. So if someone has questions or something, please reserve your questions because I cannot see your questions, neither your questions nor the hand raised. So I'll take those later on if there's something in your mind. Okay. So this is where. So I was telling you that there are different kind of reasons for learning different language, a new language or the second language. So Rivers 1968 kind of mentions 6 possible reasons for learning a new language, and I think these are the things I think I already discussed in one of the classes, that something like people may have that kind of reason that yes, I'm learning a new language to develop intellectual powers, or read foreign literature and philosophy in original. We had seen that many people, they wanted to enjoy either Tolstoy, Pushkin, or let's say Shakespeare, for that matter, many, let's say, French literature and all, So examine how languages function, the kind of linguistics we talk about, you see, and to learn about modern science and technology, and know how to interact with different community. People may have this, and to acquire either oral or written skills. So this 6 reason possible. But if you're talking about audiolingual methods, the purpose was to communicate with different community, but with manipulative intentions. Manipulative intention is that because that was the time, you see, that people were, I told you, that spying another nations, or breaching the kind of security of another, or going to another place, let's say, to see what people are doing or to gather some information, So that's what, so that kind of purpose, you see. Still, many governments, let's say, still different governments, let's say, they send their spies, whether it's India, USA, Pakistan, Bangladesh, they do it, still it has been going on, you see. So you never know with the spy, and so so the purpose was to communicate with a different community, but with manipulative intentions. So there's a different kind of intentions we had seen, And Gardner and Lambert, 1972, so motivations to learn another language could either be integrative, instrumental, manipulative, or resentment. See, that's what, there could be different type of reasons for learning a second language. And I think that what is the integrative motivation, and as well as instrumental motivation. So manipulative or resentment. So integrative motivation is, so I think if you know it, well and good. Otherwise, just briefly I'll tell you. Integrative motivation is something like, let's say you are going to USA and you will be staying there in USA, and you want to be part of their speech community. You want to be native, like, let's say, so you have larger goal. Let's say you want to speak English like the native language, the kind of mother tongue we talk about, with that kind of native accent. So, so that people of USA or UK, they accept you as a kind of native, as a kind of, part of the speech community, for that matter. So you have a different kind of integrative motivation for learning a language, So people may have instrumental motivation. Instrumental motivation is, what is that? Instrumental motivation is something like, and that's what we had seen, that only passing for a particular examination, and what, or maybe to get a certificate, and other kind of instrumental things, you see. And manipulative or resentment, as I already told you, that maybe you were sent to another country as a spy, or spying on other nations, or doing some other kind of things. You may have a different kind of motivations for learning a different language, you see. So the preparation of the course materials and classroom processes are concerned, it will also be decided by the overall objectives and motivations of learning a new language. So motivations also, it depends on, also at times depends on the teachers. Let's say how he or she does this kind of course, the kind of preparation of the course materials also. Depending on that, also people may have the kind of motivations of learning a new language, you see. And so, what will the basis of the procedural vocabulary? So there are many other things. Let's say, looking at the kind of course content also. Oh, it's only once or twice in a week. So maybe I can learn that language. So people may be really interested, So and some of the courses, especially in USA, it was very popular. Let's say in the case of immigrants, for example. So some of the things, let's say they know the grammar of the language, mainly the pronunciation part. They would like to enrich the pronunciation part. So pronunciation, culturally loaded vocabulary may be most important for those people, let's say. Not necessarily other aspects, not the writing aspect to some extent, but pronunciation, culturally loaded vocabulary may be the most important thing. So yes, please, no, thank you, I don't mind. There are many other things, let's say, related to the culture, cultural aspect things and all. So it depends, you see. And so that's the kind of socio-historical context, as I was talking about. So the advent of the audiolingual method somewhere around 19 to 1940s coincided not only with structural linguistics and behaviorist psychology, but also with rapid industrialization. Try to understand that. So it's where somewhere around 20th century, beginning of let's say the first part of the 20th century. And so what is the trend, the socio-historical or the linguistic context we are talking about? So this is the time of structural linguistics. So who are the structural linguists? Because linguistics started there itself in 1916, if you talk about. So that famous socios, it quotes the general linguistics. And this was the time of behaviorist psychology. And behaviorist psychology and the kind of understanding what we had, in the behaviorist tendency, that language was seen as a kind of behavior, as if like through practice you can learn the language, as if like learning a language, as if like riding a bike, or let's say riding a bicycle for that matter, or driving a car for that matter, you see. And so these are the things, that kind of understanding we had, and it's also accompanied by rapid industrialization, and this is the time the whole industrialization also started, if you talk about industrialization. So and this is the time somehow in tape recorder and all other things also came in the picture. Tape recorder, earlier you did not have tape recorders, so to say, and tape recorder came into picture. And so one of the things earlier what we had, people are saying that the kind of drawbacks of the grammar direct method was that native-like teachers, you do not have native-like teachers, especially if you're following direct methods. Now, after the advent of audiolingual method, they will say that, okay, even the native teachers are not there in the class, maybe you can use their voice tape recorders, and the students or the learners, they can listen to their voice and they can practice, you see. So audiolingual method came into picture, and so the need for national and international discussions and communications are also growing at a rapid pace, you see. So this is where the kind of because of industrialization, so and the need for national and international discussions and communications are also growing at a rapid pace, you see. So there is a growing impatience with language teaching methods that taught learners to read and write, but did not focus on listening, comprehension, and speaking skills. So what are the methods we are talking about earlier? So there are kind of impatience, and because somehow they did not focus on listening comprehension and speaking skills, and so that's the reason the audiolingual method. So the magnetic tape and its multiplication, the language lab, and also language lab, and made it possible to add the success of the audiolingual method. So language lab, and in our center also we have a phonetic lab. Unfortunately, you could not access the phonetic lab. We have small phonetic lab, and even in the School of Language, the new building, there are very sophisticated language lab is there, you see, and for recording purpose, for interpretation purpose, and then for other purposes as well, you see. So especially the phonetic classes, even field method classes, we also conduct in language lab, and so, and this was the time language lab was set up, and the magnetic tape and its multiplication made it possible to add the success of the audiolingual method, you see. So now what are the key features? So I just gave you the kind of background of audiolingual method, the kind of socio-historical context, let's say audiolingual method came into picture. Now briefly I'll talk about the key features of the audiolingual method and how, let's say, a particular language, a second language, was taught by the practitioners, let's say. So the main aim of the audiolingual method is to make students fluent speaker and efficient listeners. So you have to, let's say, fluent speakers and efficient listeners. It's not only speaking, at the same time listening also, and so the audiolingual, so Latin word audere, to listen, and lingua means basically the tongue, So mainly to listen, focus is speaking and as well as listening, and the language, lingua is basically the tongue, and teaching programs are based on dialogues and oral skills rather than on written text. Earlier we had written text, but rather based on dialogues and oral drills. So drills is basically that's kind of repetition, going on and on, So that's the use of drills and pattern practice is distinct feature of the audiolingual method. So drills and pattern practice, so there are certain kind of pattern will be given or introduced to the student, and so the student will have to practice those pattern. So at times, if you see that movie, that's what I tell you to see the movie My Fair Lady. So Eliza Doolittle, she will keep on practicing the kind of pattern which are given by the professor, Professor Henry Higgin. And at times, Professor Henry Higgin puts some marble inside her mouth so that she can pronounce the word correctly, the way, let's say, the English is pronounced, you see. And so that kind of things, various kinds of drills are used. And so Brooks talks about various kinds of drills. So, and today also, I'll just tell you what kind of drills are used, and this is from Brooks 1964. So various kind of drills, and this is one of the drills, and repetition drills, repetition drills. What is the repetition drills? And so the student repeats an utterance aloud as soon as has heard it, and he does without looking at a printed text. So he's not looking at the printed text. So the moment the teacher utters and repeats an utterance, the moment the teacher, let's say, says an utterance, so the student will repeat that, you see, and he does this without looking at a printed text, you see. So example, let's say this is the 7th month, this is the 7th month. I used to know him, I used to know him. So, and this is being repeated with that kind of pronunciation, the kind of phonetics we are talking about, with that particular kind of stress and the intonation pattern, So this is the 7th month. So where is the stress, whether it's 7th month, I used to know him. So if somebody is saying, I used to know him, so they'll say that to, you do not need to give focus on to, but I used to is like, you do not need to give accent to to, so I used to know him. So all that kind of things, you see. And then let's say something, I used to know him years ago. So something being added there. I used to know him years ago when we were in school, and just I added for fun that he was very, very handsome and charming. This is my line, okay? So maybe you can keep on adding and all and all. So this is where repetition, various kinds of drills are used. So one is that repetition drills. So another is inflection. What is this inflection? One word in an utterance appears in another form when repeated. So one word in an utterance appears in another form when repeated. So something like I bought the ticket. I bought the ticket. You see, the inflection, if you remember inflection, we were talking about the plural marker here, ticket to tickets, So I bought the candy. Maybe she bought the candy. And so candy, let's say plural of candy. And inflection, especially in this case, let's say pronoun thing, talking about the pronoun. I call the young man, I call the young men, So the inflection drills are also used. And another is replacement drills. One word in an utterance is replaced by another. So what is that? He bought his house cheap. He bought it cheap. So this house is replaced by it, a pronoun. You see, Helen left early. So Helen is, let's say, replaced by she. All that kind of movement, even in syntactic literature we do all that kind of movement thing. So they gave their boss a watch. They gave him a watch. So their boss is replaced by him, you see. So all that kind of replacement is also practiced. So the replacement drills, as I told you. And then another drills is restatement. So what is this restatement? The student rephrases an utterance and addresses it to someone else according to instructions. So and this is really interesting, and I think it's also good, and especially for learning the second language. Tell him to wait for you. So the teacher is saying, tell him to wait for you. So he's saying, hey, okay, wait for me. Ask her how old she is. So the learner is saying, how old are you? So it's not the thing. The teacher is saying, ask her how old she is. So the learner or the student is saying, how old are you? So in the class, this kind of practice is going on. Ask John when he began. John, when did you begin? See. So you're kind of applying your mind also, making sentences also, and in the class itself is going on. You see that kind of practices, restatement drills, completion. Still, we do it in different classrooms. The student hears an utterance that is complete except for one word, then repeats the utterance in completed form. And this is, I'll go my way and you go. So students, the teacher says, I'll go my way and you go yours. So the student will have to fill that, you see. We all have own travels. We all have our own travels. So that kind of completion, the fill in the blank types of things. So students, they will have to do that, you see. So the completion drills, and then another types of drills, that's transposition. So another drills, Brooks talks about that, transposition drills. A change in word order is necessary when a word is added. So when a particular word is added, so word order is especially change in word order is necessary. So example, like let's say I'm hungry. So am I. I will never do it again. Neither will I. So you have to change it. Let's say in this case, neither will I. Neither I will. You don't say that. So I am, in general, following the prescriptive traditions is not. You see. So I am hungry. So am I. Especially in spoken English. You see. So this kind of transposition, it's also used, and expansion. And one of the things, expansion drills, when a word is added, it takes a certain place in the sequence. What kind of expansion? I know him hardly. Let's say this is the word. So I hardly know him. I know him well. I know him well. Let's say so. Expansion, and and you know that, especially talking about adverb. Adverb has kind of flexibility. It can be placed in different positions of a sentence, for that matter. At times it can be placed initially or at the end also. So flexibility you do have with the adverb, especially in English, you see, and in many cases, we don't know that, whether it's temporal adverb and let's say a time adverb for that matter, you see. And various kinds of drills are used. Another types of drills, contraction. Contraction is again kind of, let's say, uh, you are just making, there are two sentences, joining the sentence into one. I think this kind of practice you must have done in your school days. What do you call joining? Joining. Uh, so put your hand on the table. Put your hand there. So this is where a contraction. Put your hand on the table. The whole on the table is being contracted. They believe that the earth is flat. They believe it. The earth is flat. So the earth is flat, and again is contracted. You see, and transformation also, in one of the things about transformation and the whole thing, we know that how a particular sentence can be transformed. Let's say a assertive sentence is made into negative or interrogative, so either through the change of tense, mood, voice, aspect, or modality, with all that kind of things. So transformation. So the whole transformation in syntax we do, and so this some of the things. Let's say examples. He knows my address, so you can make it negative. He doesn't know my address. Does he know my address? He used to know my address. If he had known my address, so using different things, either tense, mood, voice, aspect, and modality. So students keeps on doing all that kind of transformation exercise as well. You see, so if you know only one assertive sentence, so after that you can keep on making different sentences. You see, and you also apply your mind for that matter. You see, so if he knows my address, he doesn't know my address. Does he know my address? He used to know my address. If he had known my address, see, just giving you 2 or 3 examples from. So, and one more, I think, the integration, the joining thing, as I was talking about, along with integration. So the 2 separate utterances are integrated into one. So 2 separate utterances are integrated into one, and this kind of joining practices, joining. So they must be honest. This is important. So the 2 sentences. So 2 sentences are conjoined together. Let's say in one sentence. It is important that they be honest. You see, so this kind of practices, and I know that man, he's looking for you. I know the man who is looking for you. So this, you all know that this joining thing, integration thing. You bring different all those the kind of clauses we talk about, whether it's dependent clause, independent clauses, and all. So can be integrated, conjoined together, you see, and we know the whole what kind of things. It is important that is one of the things can conjoin, but also even WH questions, you see, can be kind of conjunction. Different conjunctions are also there for that matter, and and but and so all that, so I'm not telling you in detail, it. Okay, so and rejoinder, the student makes an appropriate rejoinder to given utterance. He is told to in advance to respond in one of the following ways, and this is really interesting, especially in audiolingual method. Rejoinder is, let's say, especially in the class. So how to answer a question? So you have to be polite. So you have to show it also that, with your facial expression also, that polite. Agree, let's say something you agree emphatically with your facial expression also. You will have to kind of give a demo of that, you see. So, and with your tone, not only tone, as well as the kind of express surprise for that matter. So how to express surprise, how to express regret. So let's say something you do not agree, so or disagree emphatically, you do not, let's say. So for all that kind of things, what kind of language you need to use, and not only that, with expression also. So it is very interesting, rejoinder things, as I was telling you, and Brooks talks about the rejoinder things, the drills practices, and some of the examples. Let's say, be polite. examples, just I'll give you one or two examples, not many. So for be polite, examples, thank you. So if someone says thank you, so immediately you will have to say you are welcome. You are welcome with that kind of facial expressions. May I take one? Let's say in a particular situation, in a context, if someone says, may I take one? So you need to say certainly. Let's say if you want to give that, so certainly. So this kind of words, and answer the questions, what is your name? Yeah, so in reply to that question, so my name is, I forgot my name anyway. So whatever your name, you can say that. Where did it happen? So let's say in answer to that question, in the middle of the street, in the middle of the street, So something like you have been trained also, and with agree examples, he's following us. So someone is he's following us. So let's say you want to agree. I think you are right. So this kind of, especially in that context, he's following us. So I think you are right. So this is good coffee. So if you agree, let's say yes, or maybe it's very good. It's very good. So agree examples, So in that particular context, So if you disagree, for that also you have different kind of, if you have like surprise, shocking things and all other things. So it is so that kind of rejoinder, and so just giving you one or two examples from that. Okay, and restoration, another drills. Restoration, the student is given a sequence of words that have been culled from a sentence, but still bear its basic meaning. So and something like, and it's also interesting, and you have to guess that particular sentence, or maybe you need to make the sentence. So he uses these words with a minimum of changes and additions to restore the sentence to its original form. So the students or the learners will have to restore the original sentence. So he may be told whether the time is present, past, or future. It depends on that, whether present times. So one example could be, let's say, students waiting bus. So that's what the teacher is saying. Okay, these are this three words: students waiting bus. So the students are waiting for the bus. So either you can make it in the present, or maybe in the past, or in the future. Okay, students um, were waiting for the bus, or are waiting for the bus, or students. So you just make that, depending on whichever the tense, so the present, past, and the future. Okay, so this is again another interesting restoration exercise. Restoration drills are being practiced in the class also, and boys build house tree, and then students or the learners have to apply their mind. The boys build a house in a tree, or maybe if you want to make in a different way, you can go ahead. So, but try to restore it, the way it is being taught by the teacher, or maybe if you can make something different, that's also okay. The teacher will also appreciate that, you see, and so it's really interesting. So various kinds of drills are used, practiced, and so far I told you different kinds of drills of audiolingual method. So what we have understood so far, the kind of key features of the audiolingual method. So key features, so it's spoken aspects, and it's not only spoken aspects. We talked about that it's audiolingual, it's basically listen the language, let's say, audio, audere. Lingua is basically language. So, and it's not only about one aspect. Audiolingual methods also gives emphasis to hearing, speaking, reading, and writing also. Try to understand that. So in compared to grammar translation method and direct methods, I think this method is to some extent far better, and if you just simply compare this, and yeah, these methods have also, it has its drawbacks. So we'll come back to the drawbacks part, you see. But somehow hearing, speaking, reading, and writing more. So the four aspects of language we are talking about, it's almost covering most of the aspects, you see. And one of the things about this audiolingual method, talking about the rules of grammar, the way in grammar translation method, rules of grammar were taught here, rules of grammar are not taught explicitly. So, otherwise, if you remember the grammar translation method, rules of grammar were explained in the mother tongue repeatedly, and but here students will have to guess those rules, you see. So students are expected to learn grammar unconsciously by repeating and memorizing examples of the grammatical structures. So I am reading a book. So related to I am reading a book, I'm writing a letter, let's say, to make another one. I'm looking for a book. Let's say if you want to make one, I'm understanding the book, I'm hating the place. So if you make that kind of sentence, let's say I'm understanding the book, I'm hating the place, maybe teacher will correct you. Oh, this is not for reading a book, for this verb is fine, but for this verb, and especially I'm understanding the book, I'm hating the place, and there are some verbs, especially in English, we do not make progressive of those verbs, and there's a list also. So the teacher will tell you that yes, somehow this is even the word is love. I'm loving it. Let's say nowadays it is fine, to some extent, loving, especially that McDonald's, it started with that the kind of Indian English, we had seen that, and so anyway, so the teacher will correct the moment you make one sentence to some extent ungrammatical or wrong. So teacher will correct that, you see. So, but somehow the grammar rules of grammar are not taught, but rather unconsciously by repeating and memorizing some kind of examples. So this is, and the whole process begins again with drills on the exceptions to the patterns. So the whole process, let's say that talking about rules of grammar, so begin with again with drills, and if there are some exceptions to the patterns, so the teacher will tell you that these are the exceptions, of that patterns. So if you remember, to some extent, there are some regular verbs, there are some irregular verbs, regular patterns are there, irregular patterns are there. So maybe teacher will give you some drills related to the regular one and some drills related to the, or maybe the exceptions related to the exceptions one, irregular ones. So the learner roles, now try to understand that somehow, and this is where we had seen that the audiolingual method, the learners are viewed as kind of organism that can be directed by skilled training techniques to produce correct responses. See, so as in like, whichever the language, learner is kind of organism, as if like it's a kind of whatever, for that matter, whether it's a parrot or chimpanzee or something, as if like the things can be repeated. If native speaker has that understanding that yes, I'm a speaker of American English, so why can't you speak like me? Hmm? So, so that they have that kind of understanding, you see. So maybe you can also ask the same question to the Americans: why don't you speak like me? The way I speak Hindi, the way I speak Bangla, why can't you? But since they are the teachers, they decide, what to do and what not to do. Huh? So learners are viewed as kind of organism that can be directed by skilled training techniques to produce correct responses. So parrot, chimpanzee kind of things. And why is this so? In accordance with behavioral learning theory, teaching focuses on the external manifestations of learning rather than on the internal processes. Try to understand that, language is basically behavior, and here the whole thing basically competence and performance, if we talk about that. So they are just focusing on the performance factor, not the competence factor, not the internal process, how it is being performed, but rather only looking at the performance, you see. So so they are not encouraged to initiate interaction because this may lead to mistakes. And even the learners, they are not encouraged to initiate interaction. So without the teacher's guidance or presence, the learners are not encouraged to initiate interaction. The reason is that if they interact, let's say, without teacher's guidance, they may make mistakes. So that's the reason it is not encouraged to initiate interaction, you see, especially in this method. And the teacher role is central and active. It is teacher over dominated method again. In compared to direct method, in the direct method, what we had seen that it is learner centric, and now in the audiolingual method, if we look at that, the teacher's role is central and active. It is teacher's dominated method, and the teacher models the target language, controls the direction and the place of learning, and monitors and corrects the learner's performance. See, there are lots of things teachers is doing. So you have to model the target language, controls the direction and place of learning, and monitors and corrects the learner's performance. You see, and Brooks argues that the teacher must be trained to do the following. And so Brooks, the drills things we are talking about, 1964, Brooks. So teachers, what are he is supposed to do? Introduce, sustain, harmonize the learning of 4 skills. So the 4 skills, what are the 4 skills? I as already told you, hearing, speaking, reading and writing. So all these 4 skills, the teacher will have to do lots of things, introduce, sustain, harmonize the learning, So, okay, so this is where the teacher role is lots of things teacher will have to do, you see. And model the various types of language behavior that the student is to learn. So model their various types of language behavior, because language is seen kind of behavior. Teacher spoken language in dialogue form. Teach spoken language in dialogue form. So even the spoken language is taught in dialogue form. And direct choral response by all parts of the class. Choral response, remember. So let's say teacher is saying something, all of the students or the learners in the class, there's repeat after the teacher. So there's a choral response, Teach the use of structure through pattern practice. So if there is some kind of structure, or let's say grammatical rules are there, some kind of patterns are there, grammatical constructions are there. So you need to do that kind of pattern practice, So you have to make it kind of a paradigm, and within that particular paradigm, make some sentences and introduce those sentences to the learners or the students, and from that pattern, the students will get to know the rules. You see, so this is where guide the student in choosing and learning vocabulary. So the teacher will have to guide the student in choosing and learning the vocabulary. So what kind of vocabulary we have to learn by the students? Again, the teacher will have to guide. Show how words relate to meaning in the target language. Even meaning, how words are related to meaning in the target language. Get the individual student to talk. Even this is the also teacher job, that if particular student is not talking, so it is his job to, let's say, make him or her talk in the class, you see. And because we know that students, there are different type of people. Let's say there are some people, introvert people are there. There are some people, extrovert people are there. So introvert people, also this has been also discussed. Let's say there are many people, they say that, introvert people are not good for language learning, and extrovert people are good for language learning. That's the kind of assumption. It may not be necessarily true. But I had seen that not necessarily the people who speaks more, they know better. Not necessarily. There are many people, they speak less, even they know better, you see. And maybe it is also manifested in the writing as well, And so anyway, so it is the job of the teacher. It is the job of the teacher, if someone is, let's very, very introvert, not talking, at least motivate the student to talk, you see. And that's the role of the teacher. And reward trials by students in such a way that learning is reinforced. So the kind of trials, reward thing, I don't know whether at times the teacher, they do it, give kind of prize or reward, whether let's say pen or pencil box or maybe chocolate or something, so that there is a kind of competition among the students, so that the learning is reinforced, So this is still this kind of things are practiced in different schools, you see. And teach a short story and other literary forms. So teachers, they do teach short story, establish and maintain a cultural island. And this is where cultural island, it's very difficult to maintain a cultural island, but they try to do it, and that's the reason also you will see that especially in different schools, let's say either CVC, what is called this Delhi public schools, and there are many English medium schools. They try to maintain a cultural island, but nowadays it has changed. I had heard that, especially in CVC, some schools, and maybe also in Delhi public schools, some ICCC boards, there are some schools, let's say, or maybe some missionary schools. If a particular student is speaking in their mother tongue or Hindi or other languages, he's being beaten up, or at least he's scolded, he's nailed down, especially in front of the class, that why did you speak in Hindi or whatever the mother tongue for that matter. So teacher try to establish a cultural island, since it's an English class, so you have to speak English, so that kind of things, and English with that kind of English accent as well, you see. So formalize on the first day the rules according to which the language class is to be conducted and enforce them. So whichever the rules, so you need to formalize the rules. See, the teacher has lots of job, to do, and whatever the rules, and those rules will have to be reinforced to the learners. Okay, so the role of instructional materials. So instructional materials in the audiolingual methods assist the teacher to develop language mastery in the learner. So you have instructional material which is already prepared, let's say. So a student textbook is often not used in the elementary phases of courses, and where students are primarily listening, repeating, and responding. So initial phase, especially student textbooks is not used, but later on, let's say, the teacher may introduce the kind of instructional material, and the book contains the structured sequence of lessons to be followed, and the dialogues, drills, and other practice activities. So later on, let's say, the dialogues, as we have already discussed, the drills, practices, as I told you, and other type of practices, the kind of pattern practices, the kind of activities, so that will be introduced later on, you see. And tape recorders and audiovisual equipment, it's also provided. Let's say tape recorders and audiovisual equipment often have central roles in audiolingual course. And the whole language lab scenario, if you remember, especially in phonetics also, we used to do that in phonetic lab, which was set up earlier in the old JNU campus. Since you did not come to JNU, you do not know what is old JNU campus. So still the old JNU campus lab is there. We used to go there, listen to those cassettes, and also those IPA, that International Phonetic Alphabets, different sounds and all. Still it is there. Maybe once you come to JNU, you can visit those language labs complex, our language lab complex as well. So if the teacher is not a native speaker of the target language, the tape recorder provides accurate models for dialogues and drills. So that's what. So the drawback of the direct method, what we are talking about, somehow by introducing this tape recorders and that kind of lessons of let's say the native speakers and their voice, so that problem is to some extent overcome here, you see. So so you do have cassettes, so you keep on listening those cassettes, hours and hours after hours, and then listen to that, and as well as you try to speak like that, in that particular fashion, you see. So so these are some of the things, and so the things what is being discussed. So the assumptions, the key assumptions. So foreign language learning is basically a process of mechanical habit formation. Language is verbal behavior. Try to understand that. I already told you the kind of theoretical assumption we do have, especially the audiolingual method has in mind, is that language is considered to be a set of verbal behavior, and as if like doing all that kind of process of mechanical habit, you can learn that particular verbal behavior. So that's the way whole methods of teaching is being practiced in the classroom. So this is where the assumption, the key assumption. So the behaviorist psychology, as I already told you, and whether it's B.F. Skinner and the whole structuralist schools, if you talk about, mostly they were influenced by behavioral thoughts, So good habits are formed by giving correct responses rather than by making mistakes. By memorizing dialogues and performing pattern drills, the chances of producing mistakes are restricted. That's what they are saying, that if you memorize those dialogues and perform the pattern drills, the chances of producing mistakes are restricted. So it will be less. So you need to memorize dialogues, all that memorization, and also the pattern drills you need to perform, repeat it again and again, So, so good habits. So if you have good habits, that means you're not going to make mistakes, you see. So good habits, what are the good habits they are talking about? All that memorizing, performing pattern drills and all, you see. Language skills are learned more effectively if they can be learned in the target language, and if such skills are presented in spoken form before they are seen in written form. So written form will be introduced later, but language skills, especially the spoken skills, are learned more effectively if they can be learned in the target language. So their primary focus is mainly in the spoken language, and then slowly and gradually they're giving, especially in the written language, you see. So, and one thing, analogy also, analogy with X and Y. Analogy provides a better foundation for language learning than analysis. Analogy involves the process of generalization. So drills can help learners to form correct analogies. So drills, if you are practicing those drills, so depending on, you can make kind of analogy, and then let's say you can make another sentence for that matter, you see. So analogy is one of the things. Explanation of rules are therefore not given, as I already told you that explanation of rules are not given until students have practiced a pattern in a variety of contexts. So you have to practice those patterns in a variety of contexts. Then maybe the teachers, they can explain some of the rules, but before that they do not mainly. The teaching of grammar is essentially inductive rather than deductive. It's not inductive. I think I already told. Even direct method followed that inductive generalization, and also in audiolingual method, it's also following inductive generalizations. So basically, you need to make those rules, or guess the rules. How is it going on? You see, and the meaning that words of a language have for the native speaker can be learned only in linguistic and cultural context, not in isolation. Remember, in grammar translation method, many words are let's say taught to the learners in isolation, but in this case, they are not introducing those words or vocabulary in isolation, but rather in the linguistic and cultural context. Okay. The teaching of a language does involve teaching aspects of the cultural system of the people who speak the language, and also the culture. The culture, a language, also it's kind of integrated, part of it. You see, so that's what. Okay. So and now, so this is where how the things are shifting. If you talk about the famous slogans of audiolingual method is language is speech, not writing. Try to understand that. Even in linguistics also, if you talk about the kind of shift, the paradigm shift which took place, let's say after Saussure of 1960s. Earlier, if you look at the historical tradition, in the historical tradition, the comparative method, people are looking at the classical language, and classical language comparing let's say Sanskrit with Latin, Latin with Greek, and other classical language for that matter. So the paradigm has already shifted, let's say, shifted by Saussure, the father of modern linguistics, and also especially in language teaching. This is the famous slogan of audiolingual method: that language is speech, not writing. So this is prime focus. A language is set of habits. I talked about the verbal behavior. So this is also their philosophical understanding that language is set of habits, as if like those habits can be easily learned, you see, and teach the language, not about the language. So they are teaching the language, but not about the language. About the language mainly the kind of grammatical rules we are talking about, too much about it, no. to teach the language, not about the language, language, what the native speaker says, not what to be said. Again, to some extent, audiolingual method is also questioning the prescriptive traditions. Try to understand that, because in the prescriptive tradition, we have seen that there is a prescribed textbook, the kind of grammatical rules which were introduced there. We do not have those rules in practice. We do not use those rules in our daily day-to-day life. So their understanding is that language, what the native speaker says, not what to be said. So this is where really interesting the slogan, at least 4 famous slogan. So these are some of the key assumptions, the kind of principles of main principles of grammar translation method. Just I'll briefly tell you the kind of criticism this audiolingual method faced. Later on, after the emergence of generative grammar, transformational grammar, when Chomsky came into picture, and as a result, slowly and gradually, audiolingual method also started declining. Why is this so? Because the main understanding is that language cannot be viewed as a kind of set of behaviors. You see, language is something else. You cannot look at language from the performance angle. Language is somewhere intrinsic in nature, and the whole mentalist traditions which are introduced by Chomsky, you see, and I think all that things. I already talked about that, universal grammar and Chomsky's aspect as well. Okay, so the criticism or drawbacks on the decline of audiolingualism. Audiolingualism reached its period most widespread used in 1960s, teaching of foreign language in the United States to the teaching of English as a second or foreign language. And the kind of criticism is that the theoretical foundations of audiolingual were attacked as being unsound, both in terms of language theory and learning theory. So language theory and learning theory. So both it was attacked. And Noam Chomsky rejected the structuralist approach to language description as well as the behaviorist theory of language learning. So both the structural theory, the structural approach to language description, as well as the behaviorist theory were attacked by when Chomsky came into picture, when the generative grammar came into picture. And language is not a habit. Chomsky 1966. So Chomsky is saying that language is not a habit structure. This is the quote from Chomsky 1966. Ordinary linguistic behavior characteristically involves innovation. Even if you talk about linguistic behavior, the language characteristically involves innovation, formation of new sentences and patterns in accordance with rules of great abstractness and intricacy. So great abstractness and intricacy. So Chomsky is bringing that kind of productivity, the kind of finite by finite means, by infinite whether sentences or words, or utterances for that matter. You see, so this is where Chomsky questioned the whole tradition and the transformational grammar. When it came into picture, Chomsky's theory of transformational grammar proposed that the fundamental properties of language derived from innate aspects of the mind and from how humans process experience through language. So the whole mentalist traditions you were aware of. So behaviorism regarded language learning as similar in principle to any other kind of learning. So behaviorism, the kind of principle you talk about. So language learning. So another type of any type of language, any type of learning for that matter, whether learning bicycle, learning how to drive a car or something, So, but language learning is different. Cannot treat or compare language learning with learning riding bicycle. So it is totally different kind of mechanism. And it was subject to the same laws of stimulus and response, reinforcement and association. So earlier it was laws of stimulus and response theory. The behaviorist, the Pavlov theory. If you remember the dog and the food, the stimulus and response. If you remember, especially in your classes, school days and all. So the ringing of the bell, the food source, and the dog will start salivating. Remember that kind of theory, So stimulus and then there's the response. So in language, it's not exactly there is a stimulus and then you may not have a response for that matter. So the kind of principles which have been practiced, reinforcement and the kind of association, all these things were questioned, in later on. And because we had seen that the innateness of the language faculty for that matter, and because of the UG, that part is already discussed. Because of UG, it is easy to acquire a particular language, and it's not only about first language, even it's same thing is applicable to the second language as well. Okay, so human language is not imitated behavior, but created a new from underlying knowledge of abstract rules. So that abstract rules, universal grammars, the kind of blueprint, what we have already discussed in my understanding in one of the classes. We have, I think, discussion on that part. So I won't talk about. So the audiolingualism, the kind of practices which were there, it is being questioned later on after 1960s and all. So there is a decline of audiolingual methods, and then that's what the Chomsky's emergence and cognitive theory. So suddenly the whole audiolingual paradigm was called into question. So the pattern practice, drilling and memorization, all these things were questioned. This might lead to language-like behaviors, but they are not resulting in competence. Maybe you have that kind of language-like behaviors, but they cannot be treated as competence. And that's what we had also seen that. So there are many people who are trained in this audiolingual methods. They sound as if like they're native speaker, especially if you look at or hear their pronunciation. But somehow, when it comes to new set of stimuli, they are not able to communicate properly. There are many people, let's say, for certain words, certain sentences, what they have memorized, they are speaking those sentences in a a clear manner, in a clear fashion. But when they encounter a new stimuli, they cannot do it. And in that movie also, you'll see that that's what I tell you, the My Fair Lady. So the character Eliza Doolittle, when she is introduced in the society, the kind of English, whatever the English she learned after those pattern practice, drilling and memorization, and she uses different kind of English, her own type of English, and then later on she challenged itself that forget about this, let me be myself, let me be Eliza Doolittle, so something like that. It's a really interesting movie, and please, if you are interested, you will see and you will enjoy this, whole grammar teaching methods and the kind of techniques which are introduced there, So this might lead to language-like behaviors, but they are not resulting in competence. So Eliza Doolittle, though she could speak English like a lady who can pass the test, the royal test, but somehow she did not have that kind of competence, let's say. So learners should be encouraged to use their innate and creative abilities to derive and make explicit underlying grammatical rules of the language. That's what the generative understanding, that learners should be encouraged to use their innate and creative abilities. So innate abilities and creative abilities. So our language teaching methods should encourage also that innate and creative abilities to derive and make explicit underlying grammatical rules of the language. That should be our target. And so the practitioners found that the practical results fell short of expectations. And in reality, what we had seen that the way we were saying that, spoken forms, and I was telling you that even after that, the kind of expectations what we have, even the practitioners found that the practical results fell short of expectations. I was giving you examples of the character Eliza Doolittle from My Fair Lady. Okay, students are often found to be unable to transfer skills acquired through audiolingualism to real communication outside the classroom. And it's inside the classroom they're pretty good, but when they come outside of the classroom, especially in the real life situation, it is very difficult for them. And many found the experience of studying through audiolingual processes to be boring and unsatisfying. Just you're practicing those pattern drills and all that. So it's very unsatisfying and also boring. So the lack of the alternative, so that's what the lack of an alternative to audiolingualism language teaching in the United States has led to a period of adaptation. So we had seen that there is different period of adaptation, innovation, experimentation, and some confusion as well. So why I'm saying is that try to understand that we're somewhere around 1960s. So we had grammar translation method, we have direct method, we have then, let's say, some of the principles, direct method, reading method, and then let's say this audiolingual method, and after some time this, the natural language, natural method were also introduced. So there are lots of experimentation and there are lots of confusion were going on. And confusion is good. People say that I am confused. I say that confusion is really good. If you are confused, that means one day you will come up with something better. You see, new ideas maybe. If you are not confused, then you do not have any straightforward answer to any problem for that matter. If someone is giving you a straightforward answer to any problem, it's not a problem basically, in my understanding, you see. So new methods have been developed independently of a current linguistic and second language acquisition theory. So there are again new methods came into picture. So one of these, total physical response, silent way, counseling learning, the natural approach. As I already told you, natural approach somewhere around 1965 or 1970s to 80s, natural approach kind of modified the direct method of language learning. And then communicative language teaching method, you see. So the communicative language teaching or communicative approach to language teaching, which is already discussed in the chapter 4, and I'm sure you have read that communicative approach to language teaching. So so somehow, especially in the class in applied linguistics, we discuss most of this language teaching methods and all, and also we generally students they present this units. There are different units, there are different chapters I give to the students, but somehow this semester, so following that book, Guy Cook, I will introduce you or discuss the next language teaching method, which is communicative language teaching method, and which is kind of like dominating now in wherever you go. In most of the modern teachers, let's say, they're like using this communicative approach to language teaching, you see. So in the next class, I'll introduce you this communicative language teaching method.